Imagine for a second that you are walking a tightrope,
Okay.
but you're not just trying to keep your own balance. In your left hand, you are carrying this multi-billion-dollar technology and defense alliance that your military desperately needs.
Right.
And in your right hand, you're holding your entire country's energy survival, the safety of millions of your citizens overseas, and your only geographic access to a whole region of the globe.
That is quite the balancing act.
It gets worse. Here is the kicker. The people representing your left hand and your right hand are actively firing missiles at each other.
Wow. Yeah, that's a nightmare scenario.
You drop one, you lose your national security. You drop the other, your economy basically grinds to a halt.
Welcome to our deep dive for today.
Thanks for having me.
Today is March 6th, 2026, and we are looking at a geopolitical tightrope walk that has honestly never been more perilous.
It really is the ultimate test of statecraft. I mean, we are watching a rising global power try to navigate a conflict where every single outcome presents a massive systemic risk to its own domestic stability. And our mission today is to unpack a really fascinating stack of sources to understand India's ultimate strategic dilemma in this rapidly escalating war between Israel and Iran.
We have a lot to cover.
We do. We're pulling from a pretty wide array of documents here. We've got geopolitical risk assessments, diplomatic press releases, deep economic analyses from various think tanks. We are also looking at reports from outlets ranging from India's Ministry of External Affairs to Al Jazeera and the Middle East Forum.
And to really grasp the gravity of these sources, we have to look at them through the lens of recent, frankly, unprecedented events.
Right.
We're dealing with the immediate fallout from the June 2025 12-day war, and even more explosively, the events of just last week.
February 28, 2026.
Exactly. That is when a joint U.S.-Israeli strike, which the sources refer to as Operation Lion's Roar, or sometimes Operation Epic Fury, resulted in the assassination of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
That assassination completely upended the chessboard. I mean, it's hard to overstate the shockwaves that sent through the international community.
What's fascinating here is that for India, this isn't just some distant war playing out on the news.
No.
It is an immediate existential threat to its economy, the safety of millions of its citizens, and its long-term aspirations as a global power. Every single missile fired in the Middle East fundamentally changes the calculus for New Delhi. They're not a bystander in this.
Their vital interests are right in the crossfire.
Actively in the crossfire, yes.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the immediate economic shockwave. Because when we read through the energy reports in our stack, India's vulnerability just jumps right off the page.
Oh, absolutely.
I know India is heavily reliant on foreign energy, but how exposed are they specifically to this particular geographic theater?
They are incredibly exposed. The sources note that India imports roughly 85 to 90% of its crude oil.
85 to 90%. That's massive.
And about 50% of that total comes directly from West Asia. That geography is exactly why the current crisis is a nightmare scenario for Indian policymakers. A huge chunk of that oil has to transit through the Strait of Hormuz.
And Iran has a lot of control there.
Right. Because of the ongoing conflict and the immediate retaliation following Khamenei's assassination, Iran has effectively closed that strait. It's a massive choke point now.
Which means nothing is getting through.
And it's not just crude oil either. Liquefied natural gas, or LNG, which powers a huge portion of India's industrial sector, is heavily impacted by this blockade too.
So if the supply is choked off, the prices obviously surge. How does that price spike ripple through an economy that's growing as fast as India's?
The math on this is staggering. The economic reports indicate that for every $10 increase in the price of a barrel of oil, it costs India an extra $15 to $17 billion annually.
15 to 17 billion just for a $10 bump.
Yes. And right now, analysts at Goldman Sachs and various Gulf energy ministries are warning that Brent crude could easily hit $100 or even $150 a barrel if this blockade and the wider war continue.
That is just, I mean, for a country like India, that isn't just a minor budgetary inconvenience.
Not at all. A prolonged disruption in the Strait of Hormuz is a structural shock to the entire growth cycle. It rapidly widens the current account deficit, which puts immense downward pressure on the Indian rupee.
So things get more expensive and their money is worth less.
Exactly. This forces the central bank to burn through foreign exchange reserves just to stabilize the currency in a high interest rate global environment.
Don't they have strategic reserves they can tap into?
India does have about 74 days of strategic oil reserves, But in a protracted regional war, that buffer evaporates very quickly.
And beyond the macroeconomics, there is a massive human element detailed in these sources. We aren't just talking about cargo ships and oil barrels here, we are talking about human lives.
Yes, very directly.
How large is the Indian footprint in the Middle East right now?
It is massive. There are roughly 9 to 10 million Indians living and working in the Gulf states.
10 million people.
We're talking about engineers, doctors, construction workers, logistics experts. And their economic contribution is vital. Those workers send back around $45 billion in remittances every year,
45 billion.
which is crucial for household incomes and regional economies across several Indian states.
The danger to those citizens became intensely real back in June 2025. The sources detail a rescue mission called Operation Sindhu. How did that situation actually unfold on the ground?
It was incredibly tense. During that 12-day war phase, a medical student dormitory on Keshavar Street in Tehran was actually hit during an airstrike.
Terrifying.
In response, New Delhi had to launch a massive, highly coordinated evacuation. They mobilized Indian Air Force C-17 Globemasters and had their diplomatic corps working around the clock.
Just trying to find a way out for these students.
Right, negotiating safe overland transit routes through Armenia, Jordan, and Egypt. They ultimately managed to successfully evacuate 4,415 Indian nationals from the active war zone.
That sounds like a logistical miracle under fire.
It really demonstrates India's impressive logistical and diplomatic capacity to protect its people in the middle of a kinetic war. But strategically,
Yeah.
it highlights just how acutely vulnerable India's diaspora is to this specific conflict. A wider regional conflagration could put millions of citizens at risk, far beyond what any airlift could realistically handle.
That brings us to the first side of the tightrope we mentioned earlier, the Israeli embrace.
Right.
Just days before the strikes that assassinated Khamenei, Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in Israel, and they elevated their bilateral ties to a, I'm quoting here, special strategic partnership for peace, innovation, and prosperity.
A very significant move.
How deep does this relationship actually go on a practical military level?
It has evolved far beyond a simple buyer-seller dynamic. It's now a deeply integrated defense and technology alliance. Look at the 2026 data from the defense think tanks in our stack. India currently absorbs 34% of all Israeli arms exports.
Over a third.
Yes. They agreed to defense deals worth $8.6 billion this year alone. But the critical shift is the nature of these deals. India is heavily focused on its Atmanirbhar Bharat, or Self-Reliant India initiative.
So they don't just want to buy weapons off the shelf.
Exactly. They want the technology to build them domestically.
But are Western partners usually willing to share that kind of sensitive manufacturing technology? I feel like that's heavily guarded.
Typically, no. The US and European nations are often very hesitant to hand over source codes or advanced manufacturing blueprints. Israel, however, has been highly willing to share sensitive algorithms and engage in joint co-production.
What kind of systems are we talking about?
They are co-developing the Barak 8 missile defense system, SYD air anti-aircraft systems, and advanced AI-enabled drone swarm technologies.
That's high-end stuff.
Very high-end.
Yeah.
And for India's national security, particularly regarding its border tensions with China and Pakistan, integrating this Israeli technology into its own defense manufacturing base is considered absolutely indispensable.
So, if India is absorbing a third of Israel's arms exports and co-producing AI weapons, how on earth do they manage their relationships with the Arab world and the broader Middle East?
The diplomatic community has a great analogy for this. They call it dehyphenation.
Dehyphenation. Okay, how does that work?
Imagine India's foreign policy in the Middle East as two completely separate parallel subway lines. One line is their relationship with Israel. The other line is their relationship with Palestine and the broader Arab world.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
India runs trains on both lines at full speed, but they treat them as completely independent tracks that never intersect. They don't let their relationship with one dictate or hyphenate their relationship with the other.
So they can keep doing business with everyone.
It allows them to buy Israeli drones while simultaneously sending humanitarian aid to Gaza and buying Saudi oil.
That sounds like a masterful balancing act. And this new special strategic partnership isn't just about missiles and drones, right? The sources mention a lot of deep tech integration.
We are seeing massive joint development in civilian sectors too. They are partnering on cybersecurity frameworks, agricultural technology, green hydrogen development. And crucially, they are integrating India's Unified Payments Interface, or UPI, directly with Israel's financial systems.
I also noticed a lot of acronyms in the diplomatic press releases regarding new trade webs. What is the strategy behind these unilateral agreements?
India is embedding itself into a Western-aligned, Israeli-inclusive trade architecture. You have the I2U2 grouping, which brings together India, Israel, the US, and the UAE for joint investments.
But there's a bigger one.
The crown jewel of this strategy is the IMS, the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. This is a massive US-backed infrastructure initiative.
How does the route actually work?
The concept is that goods would leave Indian ports by ship, arrive in the UAE, travel by a new rail network across Saudi Arabia and Jordan to the Israeli port of Haifa, and then ship directly to Europe.
Bypassing the water completely.
It's designed to completely bypass the Red Sea and serve as a direct structural counterweight to China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because on the other side of that geopolitical tightrope is India's relationship with Iran. If Israel is India's tech and defense partner, the sources frame Iran as its geographic lifeline. Why is Iran so critical to India's physical reach into the rest of the world?
Because of India's historically hostile relationship with Pakistan, New Delhi has absolutely no direct land access to the West. Pakistan blocks Indian overland transit entirely.
Ah, right. So they hit a wall immediately.
Exactly. So if India wants to trade with Afghanistan, the resource-rich Central Asian republics, or Russia by land, it absolutely has to go through Iranian territory. Iran is India's golden gate to the Eurasian landmass.
And the physical anchor of that strategy is the Chabahar port in Iran. I was reading the contracts detailed in these reports, and India went all in on this facility.
They did. In 2024, India signed a massive 10-year contract to equip and operate a terminal at Chabahar. They committed $120 million for heavy equipment and established a $250 million credit line for broader infrastructure development.
But with Khamenei assassinated and Iran facing severe internal and external chaos, what happens to that investment?
The economic analyses warn that Chabahar risks becoming a massive stranded asset. The financial tremors are already visible in New Delhi. The geopolitical jitters were so severe that in the Indian budget for 2026-27, the allocation for the Chabahar project was slashed to absolute zero.
Slashing a flagship global infrastructure project to zero seems like a massive red flag. What drove that specific budgetary decision?
It was driven by the chaos surrounding U.S. sanctions.
Okay.
Originally, the U.S. granted India sanctions waivers for Chabahar because Washington wanted India to help rebuild Afghanistan without relying on Pakistan.
That makes sense.
But post-assassination, with the U.S. fully backing Israel in a hot war against Iran, those sanctions waivers were aggressively revoked by the U.S. Treasury, only to be temporarily and confusingly reinstated weeks later.
So nobody knows what the rules are.
The regulatory environment became so toxic and unpredictable that Indian businesses and the government simply froze their capital.
This sounds like it's part of a much larger battle over global trade routes.
It is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we're essentially witnessing a corridor war. On one side, you have the IMC route we just discussed, backed by the U.S. and Israel, moving goods through Haifa.
Right.
On the other side, you have the INSTC, the International North-South Transport Corridor. The INSTC relies entirely on Iranian transit, specifically ports like Chabahar and Bandar Abbas, to move goods from India up through the Caucasus and into Russia.
So India is heavily invested in both of these competing global corridors. They need the Israeli route to reach Europe and the Iranian route to reach Russia.
And the current war is a worst-case scenario for both visions. The conflict threatens to completely collapse the Iranian INSTC route due to regional instability, regime uncertainty, and crushing U.S. sanctions.
And what about the Israeli side?
It simultaneously makes the Israeli-led IMEC route completely uninvestable because the key railway nodes and the port of Haifa are literally in a designated war zone. India's entire grand strategy for global connectivity is caught in the crossfire.
Which brings us to the diplomatic tightrope and the incredible stress of trying to maintain this policy of multi-alignment. There is a wildly specific anecdote in the naval press releases that perfectly captures how awkward this has become. Can you walk us through what happened with the Iranian warship, the Iristina?
This incident is the definition of a strategic nightmare. In early 2026, the Iranian warship Iristina was actually a guest of the Indian Navy. It was officially invited to participate in the Milan 2026 Naval Review, which is a massive gathering India hosts to showcase its maritime partnerships.
So they are hosting them as an honored guest.
Right. But just days later, as the broader war rapidly escalated, That exact same Iranian ship was tracked, torpedoed, and sunk by a U.S. submarine in the Arabian Sea.
Having your military guest sunk by your closest strategic partner has to be the ultimate diplomatic nightmare.
The defense analysts call it a massive strategic embarrassment for New Delhi. It vividly illustrates how impossible it is to play the neutral host when your guests are actively sinking each other.
And the diplomatic pressure is coming from every possible direction now. I saw in the political summaries that former US President Donald Trump has explicitly threatened a 25% tariff on any country doing business with Iran.
Which directly targets India's energy and transit policies.
On the flip side, Iranian officials are publicly furious. They expressed deep disappointment that India didn't explicitly condemn the US-Israeli strikes. And they were particularly insulted that India delayed signing the official condolence books for Ayatollah Khamenei.
It's vital we look at this purely through an analytical lens here, without endorsing either side, because that intense external pressure is compounded by an incredibly polarized internal debate within India itself.
The domestic politics.
Right. The sources map out two distinct domestic camps that are putting immense pressure on the government. On one side, the current Hindu nationalist government heavily emphasizes the need for strong security ties and shared counterterrorism efforts with Israel.
They see the defense tech as the priority.
Exactly. They view the technological and intelligence alliance with Jerusalem as absolutely critical for India's national defense apparatus.
But the sources note there is a massive pushback against that view from other sectors of Indian society.
Very strong pushback. Left-leaning opposition parties, a wide array of civil society groups, and segments of India's very large Muslim population strongly argue against this deep Israeli integration.
What's their main argument?
They argue that aligning so closely with Israel betrays India's historical, post-independence, anti-colonial stance. They point to India's traditional support for an independent Palestinian state and argue that this new posture damages India's credibility and its self-proclaimed role as a leader, demonstrating solidarity with the global South.
So you have two completely opposing worldview clashes at home.
For Indian policymakers, balancing these fierce, ideologically opposed internal pressures is every bit as complex and dangerous as balancing the external geopolitical forces. Any move they make alienates a massive domestic constituency.
This raises an important question about the broader geopolitical chessboard. While India is sweating on this tightrope, trying to balance domestic anger, oil prices, and defense contracts, what are its main rivals doing? How are China and Russia playing this crisis?
This raises an important question indeed, because the rivals are actively exploiting India's dilemma. China, predictably, immediately condemned Israel's strikes and is actively wooing Iran.
Trying to step into the gap India might leave?
Beijing sees an opportunity to pull Tehran deeper into its exclusive sphere of influence. They're potentially offering to replace Indian capital in projects like the Chabahar port, which would permanently lock India out of Central Asia.
And Russia.
Russia is playing a very cynical game. On one hand, Moscow quietly benefits from the surging oil prices the war is causing, as that extra revenue helps fund their own protracted war efforts in Europe.
Right, higher oil prices work for them.
But on the other hand, Russia is deeply fearful that an Iranian regime collapse would destroy one of its few remaining global allies and disrupt its own supply of Iranian military hardware.
So what does this all mean? When we pull back and look at all these moving parts, the oil dependencies, the defense contracts, the competing trade corridors, the internal political divides, India's quest for strategic autonomy is facing its ultimate test.
It truly is.
To defend its borders with advanced weaponry, India absolutely needs Israeli technology. But to expand its trade and reach Central Asia, it absolutely needs Iranian geography.
And above all, it needs stability in the Gulf to protect its 10 million diaspora citizens and secure the energy that keeps its economy from crashing. It's an impossible trinity. They desperately want all three, but the current reality of this war dictates that holding on to one almost certainly means losing another.
I really want you, listening to this, to think about how interconnected your world truly is. We so often view foreign policy as this abstract concept, something that happens in distant rooms with diplomats in suits.
But it's not.
As these geopolitical assessments show, a drone strike in Tehran or a naval skirmish in the Strait of Hormuz directly and immediately impacts the inflation rate in your country, the cost of your groceries, shipping delays for your local businesses. It's the health of the global economy that you participate in every single day.
That interconnectedness is undeniable. And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. to mull over something that builds on everything we've analyzed today, but looks slightly into the future.
Okay, let's hear it.
As we watch India try to navigate this impossible crisis, refusing to fully commit to the U.S.-Israeli axis while refusing to entirely abandon its Iranian ties, what if we are witnessing the permanent death of fixed global alliances?
You mean the old models like NATO or the Warsaw Pact, where you pick a side and that dictates all your foreign policy?
Precisely. For decades, global politics was about choosing a bloc and sticking with it through thick and thin. But as we watch India's survival strategy play out in real time, we might be watching the birth of what we could call a la carte diplomacy.
A la carte diplomacy.
In the 21st century, maybe choosing partners, strictly issue by issue, partnering with Israel for tech, relying on Iran for transit geography, leaning on the U.S. for maritime security rather than block by block, won't just be an Indian quirk.
It'll be the norm.
As the world becomes more volatile and multipolar, this kind of ruthless issue-specific balancing might become the mandatory survival strategy for every single nation on Earth.
That is a fascinating way to look at it. A la carte diplomacy in a world where the old fixed menus just don't work anymore. It is a completely new era of statecraft. We will leave it there for today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the geopolitical tightrope. Stay curious, and we will catch you next time.